Therapists of Reddit, what's been your biggest, I know I'm not supposed to judge, but holy moment? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1, and I had a woman once bring in her child for scholastic issues. The child clearly had fetal alcohol syndrome. I asked her gently if she consumed alcohol while pregnant, which she confirmed. When I told her that is likely the cause of the scholastic issues, she said, I don't feel bad about it. FAS in general gives me a case of the WTFs. Story 2, I work as a mental health counselor. I'm licensed as a marriage and family therapist. At a middle school, ages 11-14, I never judge any of the kids' actions, but some of these parents though. I have had kids literally tell me there, and then I have to call their parent who is effectively annoyed that they have to take their kid to get assessed. I also had a kid in the past whose parent was about to move across country for some woman they met on the internet and knew for 2 months. Some scary stuff. Story 3, I worked with a teenager who was struggling with eating disorders, to the point she'd been hospitalized for organ damage at one point, a few months before. I went to dinner with the girl and her mother. Her mom spent the entire dinner counting the individual pieces of rice the mom, was eating so she could accurately count the calories she consumed. I asked the mom to stop, and she just stared at me and asked why she would do that, because she had to watch her figure. I wonder where the 15-year-old got her eating disorder from. Edit. For those of you wondering why I was eating with the kid and the mom, the teen was inpatient and the mom was visiting. I was working as a psych tech, and the kid wasn't allowed to eat unobserved since I had to document her food intake to make sure she was eating sufficiently as a part of her treatment plan, so I joined her and her mom in the cafeteria for the meal. I definitely passed along the info about the mom's eating habits for the therapist to follow up with in family therapy. Story 4. A lovely teen girl was brought to her first appointment with me by her dad. Her mom had, as diplomatically as he could spell it out to me, recently up and left the family to go live some selfish new age lifestyle with a Reiki healer. Just abandoned him with 2 kids to raise solo, and he was doing his best for them. Therapy was the daughter's idea. She had been having troubling intrusive thoughts lately about school shootings, like how to plan and execute one, and these thoughts were upsetting to her, and she did not want to act on them. I can still picture how scared and sad she looked telling me this. I just wanted to wrap her in my arms, but instead I offered so much praise and encouragement for her seeking help and trusting me with this information. She also met most of the diagnostic criteria for onset of a schizoaffective disorder. We pulled Dad into session, caught him up, explained the most urgent part of the plan. He was going to take her for a full eval with a great psychiatrist colleague of mine who understood the situation and was going to get her in stat. Daughter seemed relieved. Dad seemed relieved. We scheduled time to talk soon. Well, Mom woke up from whatever festival ditch she had passed out in to angrily call my office and flip out on me. How dare I? Am I trying to poison her child with pharmaceuticals? Did I even draw her blood and check her vitamin levels? Do I want a bad Google review, or worse yet, a warrant issued for my arrest? Do I even understand herbal supplements? I need to stop now because my head hurts remembering all of this. Story 5. I had a preteen client whose guardian kept requesting progress notes to see how they've been doing. It's against clinic policy for clients and parents, guardians, to have access to the notes. They're allowed to have access to everything else though. The client was very defiant to everyone, but was a wonderful kid throughout their treatment with me. When I met both with the guardian and parent, who both insisted on knowing everything about the kid, everything started making sense. Once the parent requested to switch therapists only because I declined their request to the notes, I knew how unhealthy the family dynamics were. I felt bad for the kid because they were opening up more about the family dynamics and how they impacted them. We had a good therapeutic relationship. Story 6. Had a patient in a group ask for advice because she was feeling pressured into she really didn't want to have. A friend had traveled 2 hours to see her and gotten a hotel room for them. The group heard her out, asked questions, and the consensus was something to the effect of, yeah, you probably owe it to him. It remains one of the only times I've dropped any effort at experiential Socratic questioning and just flatly told people absolutely not. Edit. Wow, this reply got way more of a response than I'd anticipated. Story 7. Used to work in an acute child psych ward. Saw a lot of angry preteen, elementary, think 8 to 12 mostly boys, and most often than not, parents treated the kid really harshly and were shocked this only made the kid worse. Also worked in an area where they did not want to hear their old school parenting could be a problem. Had one dad who said, well, yeah, I will spank him, 11 son, when he gets angry. Look, I know everyone nowadays doesn't like that, but I was spanked my whole life and I turned out fine. It took my entire ability to bite my tongue and not to say, "Sir, you just got out of prison 3 months ago after serving 5 years for a violent felony." Story 8. Not a therapist, but was a social worker. I worked with adults with developmental disabilities, ID now. A mother of one of my clients asked, "Why do I bother involving her son in activities?" Her son was dropped on the state's doorstep at the age of 3. Her son was 43 when he was my client. He delighted in and responded quite well to joining activities. It was another soul-crushing moment in the field. So many days of driving home crying and borderline alcoholism to numb the pain ended my almost 8 years in that field of work. Story 9. We can judge, in fact, we have to judge harmful from helpful to be effective at this job. We also have to do no harm and provide the greatest beneficence to our clients. With that said, I've worked with child abusers and domestic violence perpetrators. On a number of occasions, I've worked with murders and even a few folk involved in dogfighting. The thing that always struck me was not the sociopaths or how many former cops I saw, but how easy a few changes in your life and or brain can lead to someone being just as susceptible to pretty terrible impulses. Story 10. As an intern, I had a couple where the woman was chastising the man because his mother is in an abusive cult that tortures children, Mormon. The guy had excommunicated and doesn't interact with his parents and hasn't for years. She thought this is a good reason to not let him parent his children, like he's not allowed to go out on his own with them because his parents are Mormon. She says she's worried that he will let his mother kidnap her kids and was asking me for support for her beliefs. She was also just calling him names. It was weird. The whole time he's like, "I don't even talk to my parents and I love my kids." In the end, she said, "I guess I'm just a bitch, aren't I?" Looking at me as if to get my reaction, and I accidentally blurted out, "Your words, not mine." Whoops. Story 11. Worked with a former therapist. Most memorable she had was a guy with serious emotional issues. His hands were all scarred up and always had fresh scabs on the knuckles when he came by. He said when he got mad, he would go to his shed and punch the soft concrete he had, or do the same to a dumpster when he was at work. In his words, he did this to avoid doing it to his girlfriend and kids like his dad to him. Story 12. Sitting in a couples session. First session ever with them, and they are openly discussing how they have 10 children between them from previous relationships and regularly physically fight each other. Both described raging so hard they would black out and not remember fights. Unfortunately, after they were unwilling to make a pledge that they would no longer use violence, I eventually had to end our therapeutic relationship. Story 13. I had a client admit that they knowingly infected someone with HIV because they themselves were miserable and dealing with active drug addiction at the time, and they wanted someone else to be as unhappy as they were. Edit. Wow, what a response. This is and always has been a hotly debated topic in the healthcare world, for what it's worth. To clear some things up, no, I cannot call the cops just because my client does something illegal, and this is not an action that was always considered illegal or is considered illegal everywhere. BTW. It has to be something that is actively causing harm, or my client has to have active intent or a plan to cause harm. Whether or not you believe knowingly infecting someone falls within those standards is up to your personal beliefs and the laws and code of ethics of your particular state. And no, I cannot just ignore my career's code of ethics in the name of doing what I feel is right just because I find a client's actions abhorrent, or based on my personal interpretation of the code. Story 14. A woman we'll call Joe who regularly complained of her relationship with her daughter. Her daughter had been taken from her when she was a child, approx 8 years, because Joe wasn't able to parent properly. Joe's driving ambition in life was to get custody of her daughter back, but everyone, including her daughter, were conspiring to prevent that from happening. It turns out Joe's daughter was 21. You can't get custody of a 21-year-old, but Joe's fixation is what had driven her daughter away. Imagine stalking your own child trying to get custody of them when they're an adult. Because her daughter was 21, I didn't have to worry about any duty to warn statutes, which is good, because that one would have been murky as hell. Story 15. For the most part, I am able to continue having unconditional positive regard for my clients. I don't judge because they showed up, are talking about it, and want to better themselves. Their families, friends, partners, however, I am totally judging. Some people are just cruel and not good, but those people would never end up in my office to begin with. I think that's the difference and the privilege I have as a private practice therapist, though. I'm sure most of the stories on here will be from people who are working with populations that are mandated to go to therapy for one reason or another. Story 16. I had this client tell me they were afraid to move forward in their relationship because they thought their partner might become a secret vampire. They were worried that one day their partner would literally start sucking blood. It took everything in me not to burst out laughing. The things people come up with when they're feeling stressed. I totally get it. Anxiety can make your brain go wild. I helped them sort through it, and they ended up realizing they were just projecting fears from an old horror movie. Still, that was one of those did I just hear that right moment for me. Story 17. I'm not a therapist, but I schedule first-time therapy appointments. I had this moment a few years back when the parent of a 4-year-old child told me that they wanted to go right to medication and bypass therapy because they just didn't have the time. They also wanted to know if we would use charitable funds to pay for services in the kids' school. Typically, I would not judge a parent for this, but seeing as how the other parent's name and face were plastered everywhere around town as they were running for an unpaid political position while living in $1 million home, I went ahead and judged the out of them. I am sure you can guess the party affiliation. The one that promotes family values. Story 18. I have worked in acute psych for the last 18 years and 25 years in the field. I have heard so much from so many people. The only real judgment I have of anyone these days is whether or not they are dangerous to be around. And if they are, I do have some strong opinions. Judgment is a funny thing. A person has to believe their perspective in some way is the correct right one to have. As far as I can tell, we're all just guessing at what it means to be a human being, trying to live a meaningful and fulfilling existence, created, raised, and surrounded by other human beings. Story 19. Even though I'm a therapist, I'm still human and have my own human reactions. How I handle them in therapy is important. I have worked with quite a few people who have done objectively awful things without an ounce of remorse. In those cases, it is on me to be a bit more confrontational. Not judgmental necessarily, but trying to push past their justifications or self-victimizing so they may be able to appreciate the harm they have caused. Story 20. I've seen and heard a lot as a therapist. However, my holy moments never come from what my clients say or do. It's from what their families say, do. I have had 2 clients that were victims of factitious disorder imposed on another, better known as Munchausen by proxy syndrome. Those mothers surprised me repeatedly. The lengths they would go to keep their child sick and to try to convince medical professionals that their child was sick was so extreme. The most insane part is they fully believed the delusion, despite numerous professionals stating their child was not sick. Story 21. I'm an addictions therapist, so I've seen people from all walks of life in all sorts of conditions. Find it hard to judge anyone for anything as a result, but I do judge when I've got a doctor, lawyer, or wealthy individual in my chair, acting like their addiction is somehow less damaging because of their income, profession, or social status. That their bad behavior somehow gets a pass. Respectably, no. Story 22. I was the patient in this scenario, but at one point when I had been seeing my therapist for several months, she wanted to examine why being around my mother was so stressful for me. I recounted to her the story of telling my mom her son had abused me throughout most of my childhood, and that I wouldn't be visiting for Christmas anymore because there was no longer a way for me to sleep behind a locked door. My mother proceeded to scream at me and call my names while I sobbed so hard I ended up puking, and then emptied all my bank accounts because I no longer deserved to go to college. She eventually put the money back about a week later and called me to tell me I had missed the very expensive present she bought me. This was a lie. She hadn't bought anything. She still pretends this never happened and cries to everyone that I never talked to her. My therapist's response was, "Jesus Christ, what the?" followed by a moment of silence while she processed that. Story 23. Not a therapist, but while on a call to vent about U.S. politics with mine, lives in UK, I was freaking out about how much political activist stuff revolves around how to avoid getting arrested. Like, I understand that there is a major jump between going to town halls and starting a Tesla's on fire, but so many protest guides don't talk about sunscreen and water anymore. They talk about facial recognition and rubber bullets and all manner of things. So when I said the stuff I was seeing was about how to not get arrested, she verbally said, "Jesus Christ." Story 24. Not a therapist, but me and my mom once did family therapy with my mom's therapist, and she asked to talk to me privately and told me that my mother is one of the most difficult patients she's ever worked with, and that she herself has trouble setting boundaries with her. She said that my mom would text her long paragraphs in the middle of the night and shows zero capacity for respecting others' feelings. Story 25. I evaluated a child and had to testify in family court. During the court session, I learned that the mother had rented her oldest daughter to her friends when the daughter was 15, 17. The mother told the daughter she had to do it, Otherwise, her siblings would be homeless and hungry. Mother used most of the money for. Father pays rents and brings grocery every week because he knew mother didn't have money. Custody was 50-50 when this was happening. The judge did not terminate the mother's parental rights, and mother got supervised weekend visits. The judge said it wasn't clear the mother's intention was for her friends to rape the daughter, so she wasn't going to terminate the mother's parental rights. She went on about the importance of children having a mother in their lives. Till this day, I judge both the mother and the judge. Story 26. Not a therapist, but years ago, I went to therapy with my then wife, now ex. She picked the therapist who was a woman, so I kind of thought anything I say is going to be met with skepticism. I know it's thinking, but that's what I thought at the time. In one of the sessions, I tell the therapist about an incident that happened, which I will try to keep brief here. I was off from work and cleaning the house. I had just finished in the kitchen and was doing laundry. There were 5 kids and 2 adults living in the house. I had 4 stepchildren, and my daughter was maybe a year old at the time. Anyway, there's laundry in the washer and dryer, and I had just finished folding laundry, so I was taking a break watching TV until the dryer was done. It was around noontime, and my wife comes home from work on her lunch break. I say hi to her as she walks in the living room, looks around and says, "Why haven't you dusted?" I was shocked, and she got mad because I was just sitting on the couch. I was annoyed and said, "Fine, I'll start dusting." We had a glass-top coffee table, so I got some Windex and paper towels and started cleaning. She says, "No, forget it. Don't." We argue back and forth with me, basically yelling that I'll finish cleaning up. As I'm wiping the Windex off the table, I see this thick brown liquid streaming down on top of the table. It's pancake syrup that my wife is pouring out because she really doesn't want me to clean now. I look at her and say, "Are you crazy?" And she rips the Windex bottle from my hands and sprays me in the eyes. After a few seconds, I feel my eyes burn, and I get up and run past my wife to go outside to the hose and rinse my face off. I look at the therapist, and she doesn't look like she believes anything I just said, and looks over at my wife and says, "Okay, what's your version of what happened?" Surprisingly, my wife says, "Well, everything he said happened, but I didn't spray him in the eyes. He's lying. I sprayed him on the neck." The therapist is now shocked and looks at my wife and says, "So that whole story is true?" My wife says, "Yeah, but I didn't spray him in the face. He's lying." The therapist asked my wife why she thought I ran outside to the hose, and my wife says she didn't know why. They go back and forth about the story, and the therapist just seems surprised by the whole thing. My wife then says, "Yeah, he's lying because I didn't spray him in the face. I sprayed him on the cheek." I'm now shocked because she just changed her story, and I pointed out to the therapist, who also mentions to my wife that she changed her story. My wife is getting pissed and is adamant that she didn't change her story. The therapist also points out that the cheek is on the face. My wife then gets really pissed off and stands up and yells at me and the therapist and storms out. I look over at the therapist, and she's sitting there a bit speechless. One would think this would be the end or close to the end of the marriage, but I hung on like an idiot for probably another 10 years before finally filing for divorce. Story 27, not a therapist, but a school counselor. Early in my career, I briefly worked at a very rural elementary school. I had a high number of students that had been struggling with thoughts in the short time I had been at this school. I think all but maybe one of their parents had such explosive reactions to hearing this about their child, very angry at them. They also did not believe in mental health services and were angry the school recommended counseling. It was awful. Story 28, to add as a patient, not a therapist. I was going through a really terrible time at 16, and to cut a long story short, got thrown into emergency therapy to make sure I wasn't going to off myself again. After telling my story to the therapist, he said something that fundamentally changed me to this day. He said, "You don't think that you're struggling with your social life and school life because of how much you're struggling at home?" And basically mentioned the abuse and mental toll I was going through at home was why I was failing in my private school life. It was the first time I felt validated in my entire life. Story 29, not a therapist, worked with people with developmental disabilities. I got to supervise a visit between my disabled client and her brother who had pimped her out. Because she wanted to see him and there were no charges, we just had to keep her safe. Someone I was job coaching, not developmentally disabled to my knowledge, causally shared that she caught her daughter sleeping around once and beat her between the legs with a belt. Since it was an old story, and the then child was an adult, I was told not to report it. Story 30. It wasn't necessarily that it was that bad, but completely caught me off guard. I was in a role where I did groups with people who worked together, and I also saw them individually. They all knew, through each other in the program they were a part of. After working with them for almost a year, And heading into my final sessions with them, one of them told me that their married coworker, who was also my client, had confessed they were in love with them, wanted to leave their spouse, and wanted me to do a joint session with them. My eyes went wide because it was so unexpected. The married client had never given me any indication of those feelings, and I knew I was terminating with them both shortly. I didn't do the joint session with them, and I learned then to have a much better poker face. Story 31. There's enough horror in here already, so here's more of a what situation. Was sitting in on psycho ed eval interview during the later years of my training. Client was a high school age male who was known to the practice already. Before getting rolling, client asked for a tissue. Sure, normal stuff. Between spring allergies and all the standard reasons you'd need tissues in the course of therapy, we were plenty stocked. Trying to build some rapport as the outsider in the room, I did the how's the weather equivalent here. Oh, bad allergies? Nah, just need a parachute. Kiddo lays out the tissue on a side table, takes out his XR version of his prescribed ADHD medication, and proceeds to pop open the capsule, empty the medication onto the center of the tissue, wrap it up like a tiny old-timey bindle bag, and swallows it. My highly seasoned supervisor doesn't bat an eyelash, but I'm clearly perplexed. So the client explains to me that when he doesn't want to deal with the extended releases part of his meds, he simply removes the extension mechanism, the capsule shell, and swallows the med in a tissue parachute, which apparently was pretty standard practice among his peers. Had never heard of it before, have never seen it referenced since. But it stood out over the copious, bizarre stories about illicit drug use I heard working with juvenile court for assessments because it was so normal seeming. Story 32, late to the party, but I am the boss of therapists. So many people don't realize how hollow a lot of therapists can become, especially the newer ones. They give all of their efforts to their clients and then have nothing left for themselves. So many deal with depression and anxiety. One story in particular, I had a therapist who I had good rapport with tell me I'll most likely kill myself in 3 to 4 years. So matter-of-factly, without emotion, she has had lifelong depression and other physical and mental health issues and essentially was resigned to the fact they would only get worse. That one really stuck with me. Story 33. As someone who works in an alternative school with probably 80% of my clients having experienced significant trauma, I could only read a small portion of this thread. I hold a hell of a lot of heavy for my clients. I can only deal with so much more. My issues are with CPS. I have seen kiddos left in horrible circumstances. A couple of cans of food in the house for the whole family for a week. Violence perpetrated against the kiddos with witnesses and physical evidence. Homes I would not let my dog live in. Predators living in the home. Drug paraphernalia in the home. Plus lots of evidence of dealing or making of meth. Parents who knew how to present sane to the caseworkers who believed them, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Cases allowed to go on for years despite the impact on the kiddos because the parent could pull it together long enough to get custody for a couple of months but could not hold it together long term, etc. Legally, I have to make the calls, but it is such a waste of time and often negatively impacts the therapeutic relationship with the kiddos who thought they finally could talk openly with someone who listens, who they could trust, but not anymore. Sorry for the run-ons. It has been a rough couple of weeks. I need a vacation, but my kiddos don't get a vacation. Story 34. When I was in my clinical internship shadowing, a client said he was getting off on ejaculating into a cup at work and filling it up with water from the communal Brita filter and drinking it around his female colleagues. This poor fellow was horribly sexually abused as a child and had several issues with deviancy we discussed. But that one made me think, HR, hello, please stop this man. Story 35. I had a dad call me and yell at me for 20 minutes because I told his son that he had to take responsibility for himself and his actions. His son was 16. Another, I had a middle school kid come in with what I thought to be his grandfather, actually be his dad. His dad said the mom had run off and wasn't in the picture. Fast forward 3 months later, a very young Eastern European woman comes in, wanting to talk to me about her son. When I started to put the pieces together, something seemed off. She was a mail-ordered bride and admitted to it. The son then confirmed, yeah, I know my dad ordered her. Wild times. Story 36, not a therapist, but I was visiting the next-door neighbors, a family of 2 boys and 2 girls. I was talking to one of the girls who was about 12 and asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up. A pilot, she said. Don't be stupid. Girls can't be pilots, said the oldest boy and laughed. Their mom was right there in the same room and said, nothing. It was 19-something. Yes, girls could be pilots. The first female pilot was in 1910. I'm male myself, and I was surprised that the boy said it, but shocked that their mom said nothing. She didn't even seem to notice it. I quietly assured the girl that yes, girls can be pilots. Story 37, I started doing therapy with grandma and her 5YO grandson, who she had custody of. She was concerned that he was waking up several times at night screaming, and he kept putting PBJ sandwiches in the VCR and destroying them. Found out she was great-great-grandmother at 60YO. When I suggested she put the VCR in her room so he couldn't have access to it, she said it was his VCR in his room. She had replaced it 3 times in the previous 6 months. When I asked what kind of shows he watched on the VCR, she said Jason, Michael Myers, and Freddy Krueger. No, the kid is waking up at night scared and couldn't sleep. Worked with another grandmother who complained that her granddaughter, 13, was dressing too grown and inappropriate, and she didn't like it. When I asked the girl what she thought about what her grandmother said, her response was, if she don't like the clothes I wear, why she keep buying them for me? I didn't even ask for them. She just keeps bringing stuff home for me when she goes shopping. Story 38. Brother-in-law developed a drinking problem after working with at-risk youth. He was favored by so many of the kids, so he made crazy bonds with these kids. One in particular was an 11-year-old girl who had been essayed in her grandparents and older brother since she was 6. She was trying to transition at 11 into a boy, and she told him it's because if she was a boy, that would have never happened to her, and her family would have never done that to her. He is still kicking the habit and doesn't want kids. He is so traumatized. He quit. Story 39, I work in a psychiatric hospital. Our primary focus is to treat the patient for what brought them into the hospital, which in most cases is SI, HI, or AVH. I had a middle-aged male patient who was admitted because the voices were telling him to do bad things. After digger a little deeper, I found out one of the many things the voices told him to do was to have intercourse with his elderly disabled mother without her consent. He was also her caretaker, as they had no other family. Of course, we filed a report, but the rest of the time he was there, I had to continue being motivational and supportive, addressing his emotions and his hallucinations until he was stabilized. It was the most disturbing case I have ever dealt with. Story 40, 14 years in the biz. I have seen and heard everything. Very recently, I was working with a new client who joined our online fitness coaching space. I'm also a sports nutrition coach, so we were working on goal setting. She goes on to tell me she signed up for coaching with our RD because her husband no longer found her body attractive. He only likes girls who are 130 weight ounces and under. This woman is 5'10". She had spent their dating life and the first year of their married life holding herself to impossible standards with food and exercise. I couldn't even blame the husband because while he had been upfront with her that his expectation was this scale number, and that if she wanted to be with him, she needed to comply at all times. Here's the kicker. She's a registered dietitian herself. God, I wanted to scream at her to get thing out of that marriage and to ask her why the hell she felt like this is what she deserved. Never in my life had I been so painfully aware of my own emotions to not project anything back. Story 41. I am not a therapist, but I have volunteered at several charities like Seeds of Literacy, help adults get GEDs over my life. While I never asked anyone why they are there, the ones that share about their lives usually share they had to be a parent to siblings or were told by some adult figure repeatedly they couldn't do it, weren't smart enough, or weren't wanted. Thank you to all the therapists out there who help people process and deal with all those difficult traumas, situations. Kindness and encouragement to others is free and may be a huge difference in someone who didn't get that growing up. Story 42. I had an intake with a client who seemed like a really nice guy, but was someone who really struggled with healthy boundaries. He had told me how crestfallen he had been after his last therapist unceremoniously ditched him. He said he hadn't understood what happened because him and the therapist had gotten along so well. The client said that him and the therapist enjoyed the same sports teams and would often shoot texts back and forth about the game. He said everything was going so well until one day when he sent the therapist a "what about Bob" meme, and the therapist never answered him again. Story 43. I worked for an organization that housed children that were under the care of child safety. I wasn't in a clinical role, but because I'm qualified, I was always asked about everything and anything. There was a time that my colleague asked me to come in and read the daily update email from support worker, and halfway down the email, one of the workers said they gave the child a back massage. The child had been molested by their stepmother during massages, and that was one of the reasons she was in the system and was under the organization's care. I had to read the email twice because I couldn't believe it. I was horrified. The client had one of the most horrible backgrounds I've come across. The first words that came out of my mouth were, "What the? Fire the support worker, ASAP?" Story 44. I'm hoping it helps people to speak their minds, but there seems like there's so much sadness here. So many young people wanting to have relationships that can't even leave the house. Also, it may not just be the case with social media, but there's so many 18 to 20-year-olds asking questions about getting out of her relationships. I guess when I was young, we just moved on. It just feels like these people don't feel as though they have their whole life ahead of them. Story 45, not a therapist, but did a physical exam on a patient that had been in treatment for at least 5 years. He had problems with regulation, his emotions, depression, and trauma. During childhood, he was sexually abused by his mom and sister. Part of the exam is talking about activity and STD risk. He told me he was a dom in the S&M scene because that's a legal way for me to spit in a woman's face, slap them, and sometimes even kick them whilst being legal. Prior to this appointment, his therapist was convinced they worked through his trauma, and he was trusting of women once again. With the patient's consent, I shared this knowledge with his therapist because it really needed some more work. Story 46. A college student came in for attempt, not just thoughts ideation, while I was interning as a therapist on campus. She had a history of ideation since she was 5. She came in to seek help because she tried to end things by taking meds in her dorm room and also self-inflicted some wounds across her face. She felt like she would attempt again. I had to admit her into inpatient care. She was scared to call her mom, and so I was with her for support when she made the call. Her mom told her to look to Jesus and to pray about it instead of getting psychiatric help. I talked to her mom on the phone. Her mom tried to tell me I had no right to do this, never mind that the student was an adult and she did want to get help. Then the mom tried to complain with my supervisor that I was awful and doing things I wasn't legally allowed to do. She tried to get my supervisor to allow her to talk, more like berate me. Luckily, my supervisor backed me up that day. She wouldn't let the mom speak to me. The student did end up getting the help. However, I knew it would be awful for her once she comes back out into the real world, once she had to see her mother again. After I sent the student away to pack up her things, I shook so hard from the adrenaline dump, and I started crying. I felt so sad for her. I couldn't believe her mom wouldn't allow her to seek help after all these years and after an attempt. I think about her even a decade later. Story 47, it was early in my career, but it sticks with me. I had an assessment with someone who was very distressed about the recent friction in their relationship. Right at the end of the assessment, they divulged that this was because they had briefed their girlfriend before their first stay with the family. The brief was that they had had a relationship with their sister throughout their teenage years and had considered them their first girlfriend. They were genuinely unsure why this had led to such problems in their relationships. My supervisor gave me context as to how unfortunately common sibling relations are. Nonetheless, for me, that was a real, bro, take that to your grave moment. Later in life, it's fit the epitome of Batman's greatest villains couldn't beat that confession out of me meme. Also, as a non-American, thanks. It's always eye-opening how broad the definition of therapist is there, and how unboundaried that role seems to be. Edit grammar. Story 48, judicial psychology. We interviewed a family where the dad nearly killed his kid by getting into a wreck while drunk driving. Kid flew out one of the windows. The kept driving, got home, and didn't realize one of his kids was missing until his wife asked where he was. The wife sued him, leading to our interviews. We found out that halfway through court proceedings that she had started seeing him in private, despite a no-contact order, was thinking about taking him back, and was considering dropping the case entirely to get back with him. I still remember interviewing the kid and seeing how excited he was to show us all of the scars he had throughout his body. It was a heartbreaking sight. Story 49, I supervised visits for DCF. The visit was a 17-year-old mom who was also in custody, meaning she was in foster care herself, but DCF was allowing her to couch surf, which means she was homeless. And the visit was for her to see her 4-month-old baby who was in foster care with a separate family. She came to the visit one day and said, "I think I'm pregnant, and don't tell me to get an abortion." She had been in 52 different foster care placements by 17 years old, but I wasn't judging her. She was victim herself, just wild. I see her name come up from time to time in court cases. This visit was about 5 years ago. Story 50, I was a SUD counselor and was in a relationship with a man I met who also was a SUD counselor and peer support specialist at a different recovery center. We broke up because he couldn't stop cheating on me. Turns out he was cheating on me with his own clients. I went to therapy for this. I couldn't tell if her face was flabbergasted from what he did, or that I gave him another chance after that and wanted her help because I convinced myself I was being unforgiving and too hard on him. Needless to say, we had a lot to unpack about my childhood, and I am no longer a counselor. He was reported and will never work with vulnerable populations again. The real trauma for me was, how did I get here? Someone who's a counselor themselves, you know? Story 51, not a therapist, but I once looked after a lovely nonverbal young teenager who was brought into the hospital by a parent for severe eczema covering their body. Instead of seeking earlier treatment, the parents showed us photos of how they had been restraining the child's wrists and ankles together behind their back. The parent was surprised when the police joined in on a meeting with a social worker. All this poor teen could do was scratch, cry, and couldn't even verbalize the pain they were in. It was horrifying, but this story did have a happy ending in a new full-time care facility where that teen is getting all of the love and care they missed out on. Story 52. This was earlier in my career when I wasn't as seasoned and versed in manipulation by clients. Narcissistic mother convinces me, over the course of a couple months, that she's prepared to have a family therapy session with one of her estranged sons to hear him out about the complaints the family had and wanted to resolve. We're talking practicing perfect reflections, active listening, and other healthy communication skills on a near-weekly basis for at least 2 months. Within the first 2 minutes, she is right back to the same, I'm the victim, everyone is turning against me, the family is punishing me, sob story. She was literally crying on cue, and I'm scrambling to retake control of the session while shutting her down and politely telling her son to stick to his boundaries and leave the session. She left the session first and emailed me shortly afterwards with a lengthy explanation of why she would not be returning to therapy. Story 53. I was a 911 operator, Chuck emergency service dispatcher once upon a time, and I received a 911 call from grandparents regarding their 3-4-year-old granddaughter stating she was acting like she was drunk, falls over, stares off. Just odd behavior the G parents recognized was not normal. The mother was well known in our small county. It's policy in our county and probably state that anytime a minor is involved in a 911 call, the police respond as well. The EMT who responded was my coworker who was coming in that night to relieve me. After about 10 minutes on scene, I get a call from a very pissed off sheriff's deputy tell me that I needed to call DHHR, CPS in our state, and start a report, get someone out there. Wouldn't give me specifics, but told me to have them call him. I did just that. The call got busy, and I sort of parked that info in the back of my mind as this kid ended up needing a life flight. So I knew it was serious. I got the helicopter in the air, coordinated all of that, and waited. When coworker showed up, he was white. He said this girl had fleas in every orifice of her body, and she was in bad septic shock. He wasn't sure she was going to make it. Wow, I thought, how horrible. A month later, I got a letter delivered to me at the E911 building from DHHR stating they investigated and removed the girl from the home. Apparently, this was the second child she had lost due to her dogs. And when given the choice between keeping the dogs or keeping her kids, she kept the dogs. Her name was Angel. Story 54. Not a therapist, but collaborated with one when I used to work in human services. Teenager, F15, was self-harming and wouldn't open up as to why. She eventually disclosed her sibling, M17, was physically disciplining her due to writing notes to boys. Their father was a migrant worker who was in Mexico, and the older sibling took it upon himself to hit his sister to teach her a lesson. The mother was complacent and wouldn't intervene. He stopped after finding out he could face legal repercussions as well as losing his soccer scholarship. Story 55, nonverbal. 5-year-old shows up for the first day of school, reminded me of Donnie from the Wild Thornberrys. I would see him at pickup after school to get his older brother, who was brilliant but struggled with social interactions, was moved to honor classes for his safety in middle school, then never again after the age of 3. After weeks of intervention, me showing up at their house for documentation, taking them to appointments, talked to his pediatrician after getting his medical records, and it was noted there was a decrease in verbal skills. ASD diagnosis, but I am certain the whole family was on the spectrum and self-medicating. He was moved to a specialty school and started talking within 3 months. If he only had that at 3 SMH. Story 56. Man on, listen, LMAO. I got stories for days, LOL. I get called for a teenager girl that is depressed. When I go to their house, the girl is sitting on a little kid bed, eating lots of chocolate and takeout. After third visit, I left saying, this is not depression, this is schizophrenia. On my last visit, which was 12 weeks later, I asked the father what her psychiatrist diagnosed her with, and he tells me schizophrenia. They never told me that on the referral. She was literally like Violet from The Incredibles with her hair covering her face. I believe they could not accept the stigma of her diagnosis, and both parents were healthcare professionals. Story 57. As someone who deals with issues and trauma, it's heartbreaking how broken other people are. I don't feel better not being so much better as much as I just feel bad. People can be so broken and not know, care, want to look inside to work on themselves. Like it took me a minute to get the part that you don't just go to unload. You can also ask for advice, like as in a good CBT route, or maybe a referral for meds, than to just talk for talking's sake. Like you don't go to be judged, but you don't go to not get help either. I am not a Dr. Chihuahua in an online therapist. Story 58. I used to sell orthopedic shoes while in college at the local outlet mall. It was on a busy Saturday during a buy one get one sale when a particular family came in. It was a pudgy grandmother with a walker, her portly fist for a face son, RBF daughter-in-law, and an edgelord teen grandson. This is the best way to describe them. Not morbid obese, maybe the grandmother, but apt description nonetheless. They moved as a group and the grandmother came straight up to me and immediately asked for my help. This was common because usually people needed help either finding their size or looking for something that is out of stock. She asked for her size in a plain shoe. I find it and turned to give it to her. At this point, she had removed her old shoe, and the smell immediately hit my brain in a 1-2 punch. Dazed, she asked me to put on the new shoe for her. This was a first, not that it was super uncommon, but I still helped anyways. I kneel down. I'm keeping in my breath to not breathe in any more of that rank, dirty, sock-covered toe jam. I get the shoes on her as she leans back and forth on her walker to get enough space between the floor and her foot for the shoes. She's happy as a clam for the new shoes, which was nice. But then the family checked out, and the son and daughter-in-law start turning a shade of red, trying to argue that they should get half off because of the sale. A sale literally called buy one, get one. They finally concede about the price and storm off, saying how bad the service was with the cashier, but the grandmother thanking me on their way out. I judge them privately. I judge that entire family. What kind of family goes out to buy shoes but doesn't even help their ailing grandmother? What condition does a family leave the house to buy shoes and not put on clean socks for that same grandmother? Who doesn't wash their feet then ask a stranger getting minimum wage to touch said feet and then argue over their own assumption of how a buy one get one sale works? Story 59. Don't mind my spelling errors. English is not my first language, and I'm not based in the U.S. I had a client who came for language problems, but I already suspected that there was more going on. Mother was always very vague when I asked about the previous speech therapist and the tests at the audiological center, but told me that everything had been completed well. The results of the language tests that I had taken were far below average. This language test did not make any demands on his reading skills because he was still doing the younger version of the test at the time. According to our guidelines, you have to treat a child for 6 months and then retest to see if there has been significant progress or not. If not, you have to look at possibly involving other agencies. With the retest, components were added that did make demands on his reading skills. Because of the new components, I discovered that he simply could not read. The child was 9 years old. When I discovered that, I immediately contacted his school. After submitting all kinds of requests for additional research, we received a response after 3 weeks. The request was denied because he had already been examined 5 years ago, and the parents were advised to take the child to the pediatrician because there may be more going on, and to send him to special primary education instead of regular. Conclusion: the parents lied to the school and me and made sure that the child has a learning deficit of 5 years. Story 60, not a therapist. However, I do get judgmental as over an incident. Long story short, I wear an eye patch. As I'm out and about, kids will often say, "He looks like a pirate." Au vient with delight. Parents will often shush them, like to teach them tact, and there is a time and place for such things. Basic life lesson stuff. However, while not all K8Ds will say something, but it is easy to see the reactions of those who notice. Then there are those who are so closed off from the world around them, so shut down, so disinterested in what's going on, that it's like their natural curiosity has been taken away from them. Sometimes, it's because they didn't notice me, or they are tired or whatever. There are times, however, in seeing the adults they're around, how much of their eye wonder of the world around them has been beaten out of them. Story 61. Not a therapist, but I haven't seen anybody cross the line into HIPAA violation territory because it would be incredibly naive for someone to read one of these stories and know that it was their own story, like they are so unique and original that no other human could have thought or done the same. It's almost impossible to have a truly original thought. Just because something is documented doesn't mean it was never done before. Next theme. What are you unintentionally really good at? Story 1, retaining obscure facts and knowledge. I tend to zone out a lot, but my brain has a way of channeling in regardless, and then storing random, and then when and if it comes up on a quiz or game show, I somehow know the answer to the most random thing, but no idea how I know it or where I learned it from. Story 2, knowing how other people are feeling. I can tell when someone's in a bad mood mostly by their body language, but also their tone of voice and the way they speak. I've also picked up on changes in texting habits, and that's clued me into how someone is feeling, but that could just be pattern recognition. A lot of other people notice things like this, but most of them picked up the skill because of a traumatic childhood or abusive relationship. But I haven't experienced either. I think it might be the autism in me trying to overcompensate, but I've never been officially diagnosed, so who knows? Story 3. I'm creepily good at reading people. It's sort of like a superpower, and I scare myself sometimes. It takes a lot, but if someone makes me mad, I can pick them apart with the most accurate roast session ever because I've clocked all their insecurities. On the other hand, I know exactly what to say to make someone feel good about themselves. I have the ADHD, and I think that it's connected somehow. Anyone else experience this? Story 4, driving. One minor accident when I was 16, nothing in the 30 years since, driving roughly 30K miles per year. You'd never know it if you watch my wife as a passenger who is constantly bracing for impact when someone brakes 1 4 mile ahead. Story 5, I get described as the sweetest guy ever, frequently. That sounds like humble bragging, but I promise it's not. I see myself as very irritable and prickly, so it surprises me that I have a reputation for being kind. I'm also physically strong just by virtue of being tall and big. I didn't really cultivate it. I just hit a growth spurt in high school and have worked active jobs since then. I'm not a great dancer, but when I do community theater, they'll have me in numbers to lift people. Story 6, balancing grinding wheels. I work in a machine shop, and we have to balance the grinding wheels before mounting them on the machines. Most people take 2 to 3 attempts before getting the wheels fully balanced. I almost always get 100% balanced on the first try. Story 7, intimidating people. I have paranoid schizophrenia, and my facial expressions inspire fear in others, but have sat down in an empty train many times, and as people get on, they avoid sitting near me to the point a 6-seater is just mine, because I am sitting here normally looking out the window. This has its silver lining. 2 of my brothers have been mugged me. Never has anyone dared. It's a sad world we live in, but it's the life I am stuck with. Story 8, Microsoft Excel. I work with Excel every day, but my job doesn't require a high level of expertise in it. I keep thinking of ways to make things go faster so I have more downtime. Am lazy. It started with me getting functions from ChatGPT and Googling stuff as well. It didn't take long to just start typing out my own functions that I just kind of received through repetition and context, like function names and Microsoft Help that pops up. This ends the unintentional part. Intentionally, I taught myself some VBA and started making macros as well. Fortunately or unfortunately, I'm now the Excel guy everyone goes to. Story 9, being in the wrong place at the wrong time in supermarkets to their car parks. Wherever I choose to park, someone either parks up next to me right away, and I have to wait for them to get out. Pedestrians walk out behind me the second I try to reverse. And if I'm trying to find a quiet area of car park, I always get followed. As for in the supermarket itself, people constantly walk where I am and I have to swerve to avoid them. They always need to be at the shelf I'm at the same time. One time I was editing the food shop note on my phone. Standing aside, dude needed something. I moved. He needed something from there. I moved, and again for a 3rd time. Like, dude, F off. Story 10. Untying knots, Russian tangling. I'm not usually all that patient of a person, but something about meticulously working through a big tangle of something just takes me away. I untangled an entire skein of yarn that my sister-in-law ran through the washer and dryer, and I only couldn't untangle about 12 inches of it at the end. I also read stupid fast, and I don't really have an explanation as to why or how. It was never something I've consciously learned to do, but it does come in very handy. Story 11. I remember the texture and taste of every single raw ingredient I have ever cooked with. I can also intuit how well certain textures or tastes mix together with regular success. It has gotten to a point where I can just about feel and taste how well a dish will potentially be in my mouth just by looking at the ingredient list. Miso thinks this is straight up sorcery. Story 12, public speaking. In middle school, I convinced myself that no one listens to whatever I'm saying. Ever since then, it hasn't bothered me. Plus, I can just go on and on about whatever I'm talking about. 5 minutes or 50 minutes doesn't matter. I'll just freestyle it, and it always sounds good. I have done 3 best man speeches off the top of my head. Not a single thought about it beforehand, just wing it. I have no idea how or why I can do it. Story 13, packing and organizing stuff. I think it's because I play a lot at Tetris. I can eyeball where things fit, and if they will fit. People always tell me things won't fit, and I tell them to just try it, and they're always surprised the thing fit where I said it would fit. Lol. I'm also weirdly super good at dealing cards. Just very precise and fast, probably also from playing Tetris. Story 14. I'm really good at most things the first time I try them. This annoys the out-of-racist white guys. It makes it seem like I'm super capable, but the truth is, I plateau really fast or just progress slower. So if I enter a competition with mostly newbies, there's a good chance I'll come out on top. If I'm up against specialized talent, I fall way off. I have a huge skill set, but none of it is developed very deeply. The advantage I get out of this is that I can transfer knowledge from a wide variety of skills into learning new ones quickly, but instead of getting super deep in any one skill, I just keep picking up more skills. It's been unintentional my whole life. I also get to creatively solve problems and offer unique, innovative solutions that incorporate knowledge from many backgrounds. But I often daydream of creating things that would require me to focus in on more specialized skills. And I know if I'm going to accomplish some of those things, I'm going to have to change my patterns a bit. Story 15. Synthesizing. I can make a short, concise, and comprehensible summary on most any topic very quickly. I just put the info together in my head, and my brain just does the abridged version instantly. It's great in my corporate job where people like to use long metaphors and useless euphemisms, and sometimes people don't understand what's going on. I just jump in with a quick summary, explanation, and everyone's kosher, and we can move on. Story 16, gardening. I'll murder a houseplant though, but I have a very upset neighbor who can't grow avocados, planning their attack on my thriving avocado trees. My mom rolls her eyes at my veggie garden. Constantly ask what I do. I have no idea. I just throw it and water when I remember. Story 17, spreadsheets. Pivot tables still confuse me, but I've built all kinds of useful tools in Excel, for work and for home. I even ran a D&D campaign for my wife and kids, using spreadsheets for everything but the combat maps. I find fun in wondering if Excel can do a thing, finding out that it can, and then putting that capability to work for me. Story 18, driving. I can back a trailer in anywhere. I drive a 1-ton truck and feel like I know exactly where the corners of the vehicle are and can squeeze it in wherever I need to. I haven't had a ticket or an accident in over 20 years. I haven't so much as accidentally backed into a bollard or tree ever once in my life. I can do anything on a forklift. I don't even drive the forklift, but when there's something tricky that needs to be done at work on the forklift, the guys come and get me to do it. I'm not trained in anything, but we went to one of those go-kart places a couple months back, and I ran the fastest lap of the day. Driving stuff just seems to come really easily and naturally to me. Story 19, extreme focus under extreme pressure. No idea where it came from, but the more stress I'm under, the better decisions I make and the fast I make them. It's made me extremely successful in my career. I should have been a doctor or something important, but I pissed away my early years drinking and partying. Story 20. Looking good, not to brag, but somehow I just always look fresh and clean, no matter how sick I am or hungover. I don't try. I don't take good care of me at all, yet I always get compliments. I smoke and drink way too much. I don't sleep enough, no sports, always looking at a screen, not eating too healthy. Yet I always look good, and it's been like this for over a decade. On many occasions, I had even friends and family not believing me that I'm sick because I don't look like it. It's a cursed blessing, I guess. Story 21, I am a product designer who started out as a graphic designer. While I was building my portfolio, I took technical writing jobs to pay the bills. During those years, I racked up dozens of technical writing awards in the software and consumer electronics industries. At first, I enjoyed it because I was a young person getting a lot of professional attention. But eventually, I realized that I do not like technical writing very much at all. I just have a head for organizing and connecting information, and I love to read, so I picked up some writing skills along the way. I'd give up every one of the plaques and trophies to go back in time and attend a proper design college like I should have. Story 22. Don't know if this fits the ask, but I was gifted with the ability to see systems and patterns in everything around me. I used to tell people that if they couldn't see the pattern in something, they were standing too close to it. There are iterative patterns within patterns, much like the fractal images you can find online. Endlessly interesting if you look at them the right way. I developed a type of transformational logic that allowed me to predict and later design IT systems that would translate business and data network flow demand into resilient, highly available infrastructures. That was actually a fairly narrow, though pretty successful use of my ability. I had fun doing that most of the time. And the redundant, high-availability networks I designed really fed my OCD as well, LOL. Beyond just IT, I can see continual patterns emerge in everything around me if I'm able to get realistic input and viewpoints. I know this sounds really cryptic and weird, but you'd have to experience this to really understand it. Everything is connected. Everything is related. Energy streaming as sunlight emanating from our sun will eventually affect each and every aspect of your life, top to bottom. Energy transforms into an endless variation of different forms and effects. If I'm not overly stressed or too beamed up on caffeine, I can visualize this process in a lot of detail. Back when I wrote software for a living, I'd go on 16 and 20-hour jags doing coding, cranking out these hugely detailed and interrelated code constructs. It was really satisfying to build stuff like that, even if it was difficult for others to really see what I'd accomplished. In retrospect, I guess it was a form of mental masturbation, sort of. I did it to make a living, but most times it didn't need to be as elegant and complex as it turned out. And most of what I built back then, very few people ever saw. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there like me, with the ability to handle patterns and logical constructs like that. On the flip side, I really suck at spatial. GPS saves my ass when it comes to navigating around. And I was born without any form of a sports gene. Story 22, listening. I tend to attract talkative people even though I'm quiet, but over the years I realized they're just looking for an outlet, someone willing to listen to their woes or what amazing things they have been up to. I mostly keep to myself, but whenever I need someone to talk to, though, everyone disappears. So yeah, I think I'm good at listening, probably. Story 23, typing. I was forced to take a typing class when I was in 5th grade. They said if we finished the whole program on these janky old IBM computers, we could play Oregon Trail. I was really determined to play video games at school, so I tore through that program. It was really hard, though, and I ended up becoming pretty fast at touch typing. I usually type around 130 words a minute now. And I'm super thankful for it, but I certainly had no plans to get good at it. Story 24, badminton. I occasionally played as a kid, never was on a team of any kind, and I'm super uncoordinated with most other sports, though I'm really good at serving a volleyball. But badminton, man, that shuttle never touches the ground. We were at a rec center once and had time to kill, so I was on a 4-person team playing another 4-person team. Eventually, everyone on my team left, and I kept playing against 4 people. I never let the bird touch the ground. It was my proudest moment. Story 25, cooking. I was looking for a summer job years ago while I was a student and ended up taking the first job I was offered, a line cook job at a fairly nice restaurant to steakhouse. It was a pretty corporate place for better or for worse, but they took training new cooks really seriously, even those who had no culinary experience. Fast forward almost a decade later, and I'd consider myself a well above average cook, and have been working in the industry since that time. I never envisioned myself doing it professionally as I just kind of stumbled into it. I'm in school to do something else now, but I'll always have it as a life skill. Story 26, talking down hostage takers. I know this sounds extreme, but I am autistic with high pattern recognition and mood reading ability. I was myself taken hostage as a teenager, which went badly, and from that I learned what to do and not to do. I now work in mental health recovery and intervention, and my past experience and my autism have helped me successfully talk down 3 separate hostage situations, knife at the hostage's neck in all cases. I never intended to be good at this, but here I am. Story 26, understanding complex language. By that I mean in things like philosophy, law, scientific textbooks. Always had a really wide vocabulary. Plus I like learning new words, so lots of things just click. Also, for a person with dyscalculia, I can understand financial products, sure instruments really well. Can't do the math behind them, but I can understand how they function. Go figure. Story 27, names. But not when I meet you. That will slip right through and past me. But if I've seen your first and last name in a file somewhere, then, even months later, a colleague can go, "Yeah, you have to talk to Wendy." Eh? What was her name again? From HR? And if I so much as hear this conversation in the room I'm working in, I'll just blurt out, "Johnson?" and often hear, "That's it, Wendy Johnson." And again, if I look you in the eye, shake your hand, and hear you say your name to me, on God no cap, I'll have to ask again, literally seconds after. Story 28. Apparently, I'm really good at golf, even though I don't really even like it. In high school, I won a trophy for the best golf score in my gym class. Yes, we did a week of golf. I went to a driving range once, just to spend time with my dad, And a golf coach who was next to us told me I had a really good swing. He asked me how long I had been playing, and he was shocked when I told him never. He gave me a little impromptu lesson for a minute, just fine-tuning my swing. I still don't like golf. Story 29, I can read people. I kind of got this superpower after some traumatic experiences where I noticed a pattern that if the person is going to help me or benefit me, shows on their faces. Some are too, but at the same time egoistic. Some are willingly not going to. Some are selectively not. Some don't care. And some are beyond ready. Just not in such cases, but many more. I can lie on the spot, excellent at making excuses, and I remain calm in any embarrassing, stressful situation. But earlier I was always a bait of everyone's anger and ego. But now I can read faces and see through the drama. I mean, it just doesn't mentally affect me like it used to, as I can see some people just say for the sake of saying. Mostly it's my brain's way of protecting me after all that I've been through. Story 30. Anything that requires aim. IDK what it is, but it's like. I can naturally picture the angle and amount of force I need to get whatever it is where I want it to be. Examples. I've never practiced archery, but I worked at a medieval martial academy, and the instructors commented on my ability to have tight groupings for a first-timer. I'm also one of 2 people to have Robin Hood an arrow, splitting an arrow with another arrow there. I was always good at throwing 3-pointers, but I was playing basketball on acid with friends, and consistently was sinking half-court shots. My muscle memory is really good, that once I figure out the exact movements I need to make, I can redo the movement. I've been personally taken under the wing of all my gym coaches because of the aim thing. It extended into ultimate frisbee, football, dodgeball, tennis, also woodworking class, whenever we had to make stuff like catapults or ballistas. Part of me thinks it might be because I've been playing shooter games since I was 6 and trained my hand-eye coordination from a young age. Story 31, memorizing and recognizing vehicle make, model, and year. I am a woman who knows nothing about cars. I genuinely cannot change my own windshield wipers, but I have a mental database of almost all car make and models sold in the U.S. from 1970s to now. I can look at a car with headlights on in the complete dark and tell you what make and model the car is, and even the year with 1 to 3 year accuracy range. I can look at the side of a car with no logo or name on it and tell you what it is just by the body shape and silhouette of the car. I have no idea why. Story 32, old lady voices. Ever since I was a teenager, I could just mimic that kind of voice with ease. I'm a woman, BTW. In a high school play, once I missed auditions because I was sick, but was given a small part anyway, since I was part of theater kid crowd. It was for an old lady character, a nun, had 2 lines on and off stage in 45 seconds or less. For some reason, on opening night, after saying my 2 lines and started to leave the stage, I got a standing ovation. At first, it didn't even register that they were clapping for me. It didn't make any sense. The character was akin to tree number 2. My lines were not important or meaningful in any way. Turns out, after the show, I had a friend come over to me laughing. Her parents and apparently everyone else actually thought I was a real geriatric nun that the school hired for the show for some reason. Besides the voice, I guess the costume, makeup, and the fact I'm super short helped sell the illusion LOL. Story 33, laundry, specifically stain removal. And I'm not talking general dirt and food stains. I've gotten blood stains out of mattresses, red wine out of white knit sweaters, rust stains out of carpet, and to my wife's astonishment, I can get bleach stains out of her Lululemon leggings. I'm also really great at preserving down comforters, vests, jackets. I'm currently bringing an Icelandic wool blanket back to life after our dog peed on it. I hate laundry and it makes me so angry to do it. I don't want the patience and instincts I feel when working on a tough stain. It's bullshit. Story 34, typing. The computer class that I had to take when I was 15 was mostly centered around learning touch typing. Typing without looking at the keyboard. I hated it. I could barely hit the minimum of 25 words per minute. But after years and years of commenting on the internet, without purposefully ever trying to increase my typing speed, I can type consistently and accurately at around 95 WPM. I feel like I can remember reading that secretaries back in the day were considered to be exceptionally good at typing if they were over 110 WPM. So I think my 95 WPM is nothing to shake a stick at. Story 35, I think I can be moderately funny if I'm not trying, and I'm relaxed and comfortable with my surroundings. People say I have a tiny filter, which makes me say I'm things that are considered unexpected and raw. Don't know if this is true, but I love making people laugh by not trying to make a joke. but just by observation and analysis of things I find noteworthy. Story 36. I'm unintentionally really good at picking up on patterns in conversations and remembering details about people, even when they don't expect it. It helps me give personalized advice and make connections between things they've mentioned before. Story 37, being a nice person, or I guess an endearing, kind heart person. I always help someone out, but I end up getting easily hurt when I get attached to someone. I have been going to therapy and learning that people like me will often feel the most hurt is both sad and a good thing to hear. I wear my emotions on my sleeve, and I don't plan on changing my behavior. Story 38, writing. I only do it to get over complicated emotions off my chest. It's really just my way of rationalizing thoughts which are conceptually beyond my own understanding, which just so happens to be love more often than not, the only thing I need and one thing I never had. Story 29, guesstimating subtractions and additions of decimals and fractions. They'll often ask me at work, hey, what's this minus these two fractions, plus 0.60? He'll say something like, I think near 11, 5/8, and one more 32nd, but let me get the calcs. Co-worker and or boss will just cut to that number. I've told them numerous times something to the effect of, you know, I haven't actually done the math, right? And even the boss will say things like, yeah, but you haven't been wrong yet. Thing is, I have, but always in the easy way, where they can just cut a little bit more and get to the dimension they needed. But apparently that doesn't count as wrong. Story 30 IDK, if I'd call it unintentional or not, but I'm just very naturally good at math. I've hardly needed to do studying all through differential equations in college for anything that's straight math. Always was a top math student before college too. The debate on intentional or not is that I take classes for it to learn, and I do need it for my major, so like there's intent to learn it. Story 31, talking up people. I went to a little bit of college, was a huge bookworm growing up, and did fairly well in debate class. Very early on, I learned I could talk my way into and out of anything within reason. Most days has seen as a talent. Other days, I don't know. I never liked selling products to people unless it helped them, and I knew it would help them. This skill can often lead to being brought into tough situations last minute to fix things, which doesn't sound bad, but it makes you feel like a tool, not a person. My neighbor, who is a retired police chief, said when I retire, I should consider going into negotiation training to help in civilian assistance programs. I probably will. Story 32, target practice. I surprised my father at 15 by hitting almost all the cans when he showed me how to use a gun. One of those that shoots small plastic balls, not a proper gun. The few times I've done laser tag and the like, I'm always on the top % for accuracy. I'm nothing spectacular when throwing balls and such, just average. Story 33. Now this is gonna sound horrible, but I don't use it for malicious purposes, but manipulating people seems something I'm good at. I guess it is more having an understanding of people and what they want to hear. I am a kind and non-violent person by nature and a bit shy, so maybe that is a factor. Noticed this ability a few years back when reflecting on myself and did some introspection. It has scared me a bit and made me wonder if I have a tendency to be a psychopath, so I stay away from it. Story 34, retaining knowledge about history. I never had to study for history class in school. Even specific dates just end up being recallable. I was never even really that interested in the subject until later in life. It just came naturally. Artistic endeavors. I've not found a visual art media that I don't have at least some aptitude for. Trying to make art into a career kind of beat any enjoyment that I get from it out of me, though. Story 35, making grown men cry. I, 51F, noticed in my late 20s I often bonded quickly with men, and they seemed to feel safe with me. Conversations often turned very personal, and the man would have an emotional release. I ended up working with men in jail or on probation, and now I'm a therapist. Also, sometimes they cried because I broke their heart, and my dad often cried because I was a terror of a teen. Story 36, literally anything creative, crafty. IDK, except for learning how to draw, I haven't had to work very hard to learn other things. Like I started crochet less than a month ago, and I have already made 2 of my own patterns. Took up embroidery a few months back. It felt too easy. Same with origami. I didn't know how to paint that well, but last year during summer break, I just decided I wanted to paint a face, and I did. It didn't look like the model, but it turned out pretty realistic. Though this is the only stuff I'm good at. With studying and things that actually matter, I'm kind of slow. Story 37. Even though I'm autistic and this is supposed to be hard for me, I have a natural clinic eye when it comes to psychological matters. I'm able to observe the details in a person's aspect, behavior, and speech, and relating those details to a personality aspect. I'm not flawless, but more often than not, my deductions are accurate. Story 38. I'm really good at gathering details in any given environment fairly rapidly. Like I'll count how many pickup trucks I see over the course of a drive or the types and colors of clothes. I'll generally watch how people move and try to determine how controlled they are, their movements, etc. I also do this thing where I don't really ask people questions, but I'll instead make an observation, usually intentionally wrong, that invites someone to speak, then gently disagree so they give more proof of how right they are. For example, me, wow, you must make a killing at your job. Them, no man, times are tough. Me, no way that's true, your clothes are too nice. Them, I'm struggling to even make rent. My apartment is in expensive area, and business is slow right now, so I'm dipping into savings, and so on. Anyway, I do this because I'm so anxious that behavior like this allows me to feel every interaction is a game that I'm just playing along with, so I can function. My life wasn't an easy one, so I find being able to rapidly convey information while also knowing where moods and dangers to comfort me. Story 39, sports. I'm naturally athletic and love playing sports, but hate being on an actual team. I always played just for fun and to see what I could do. Losing in an amazing way was just as rewarding as winning in one. That mindset doesn't mesh well with organized sports culture. A friend of my family who has been in sports his whole life and has coached at various levels was surprised when he saw my athleticism and made a joke that at some point I hit a fork in the road and had to choose between athlete or emo, and I chose wrong.